tomorrow at noon, Moore Hall across the way.
Yeah, I have a solution. Okay. It's not working, so this is going to be the mic. You can come up.
Okay, so good. Let me.
I'm gonna stop.
Oh,
This
okay.
laptop is just a microphone.
Okay.
You can bring yours, yeah. Maybe we can set it.
Look at this light's nice.
Okay, you can't see it. Is that okay for you to see?
Yeah. It's just that it's easy.
Okay. Yeah.
If it helps.
Thanks. Yeah. See, this one is to see it.
Please do this.
Here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Again, I'm gonna put this up here.
Okay.
That way you can see them.
Great.
And then this is the microphone now, so.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you, Carlos, Dr. Juarez, for your kind introduction and for having me here. Thank you for attending this talk today, both of you who are here in person in the flesh and bones and those of you who are online. I'm delighted to be here, coming all the way from Italy, and in many ways also complementing previous recent talks that have been made here at the East-West Center, such as the one by Taylor Fowles from the German Embassy in Washington, D.C., speaking about the Euro-Pacific nexus. And recent news have shown indeed, at least from the German side, that there is a growing engagement, security engagement, that is actually consistent in the region, as demonstrated by Germany's successful negotiation of reciprocal access agreements with Japan and status of force agreements with Australia. And in many ways, my talk will actually explore the why and how Europe, with specific reference to the European Union and important EU member states, especially G7 members, have stepped up their security game in this region. What I will try to do in the 25 minutes of my presentation is to give you an overview. And the slides I have are very busy. To put it in a typical English way, that is, that they're very very loaded with information. So forgive me if I will actually surf through them quickly at points, and also forgive me for my ongoing jet lag. Next slide, please. So in the original plan I had for the talk, I wanted to actually give you an overview of what Japan's grand strategy vis-à-vis China has been, especially since the second Abe administration. But some of the attendees I see in the room have already heard me blabbing about Japan's grand strategy, and I will simply, in the interest of timekeeping, suggest to actually go and buy the book that you see. The book has been translated into Korean, so if you are a Korean speaker, you will also aid the fortunes of a very small academic house, because the number of sales, I'm sure it's incredibly limited. But in a nutshell, what I would like to argue is that under the second Abe administration, the Japanese government has embraced grand strategy with a view of checking Chinese power across the diplomatic, informational, military, and economic domains. I have also published a co-authored article that I'm happy to share on the attempts, and the successful ones, by the Japanese government to deny China a sphere of influence, often so by working with like-minded partners in the Pacific, in Southeast Asia, all the way to South Asia. Now, I do mention this because one important component of Japan's grand strategy has been the ability to transmit its own preferences for keeping in check China's rise across these domains, and do so not just in Washington, D.C., not just by leveraging and trying to effectively unleash the United States' structural power against China, and successfully so since the first Trump administration, but also by trying to influence and to all effects cajole European players, starting with G7 plus players. Next slide, please. Now, this talk actually straddles my recent policy research as well. I have been commissioned, together with my long-standing co-author Aurelio Incisa, who is a China specialist by training, a report by the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament to actually explore how the EU and its member states can step up the game in keeping peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait by taking best practices from important like-minded players. First and foremost, we argued, the United States of America and Japan. And so I, again, in the interest of time, suggest that if you're curious, go and have a look at the report that you see on the slides, which is freely available online. And it speaks to the very research questions that I'm going to explore today. Next slide, please. And these research questions, because I'm an academic by heart, although I try to look at policy issues, thank you, and topical matters, I always try to frame my writing in terms also of contributions to the literature. And here specifically, I will effectively try to give you a window on my parallel research activities that have been concerned with how Europe has stepped up its game in the region, starting with the EU, Italy, and other EU member states. And so, to cut a long story short, the research question is effectively how is it and why is it that the EU and key member states have embraced the Indo-Pacific, quote unquote, which is a new geopolitical construct, with varying cartographic and normative definitions, and we can go into greater details about what this means. But specifically, how and why is it that Europe, defined as above, has to all effects heightened its security profile in this region? And the typical traditional answers to that question have touched on the key interest of major EU member states, notably France, which has active stakes in the region, notably citizens, territories, and a massive exclusive economic zone. Others have suggested, and I would argue that this is also very true, that there has been a security alignment with the United States. And initially, and this was my initial understanding of why is it that Europe has engaged in the region, effectively neo-mercantile goals have gone hand in hand with the European Union's interests in cutting itself a third-way space that is distinct from the power political nature of the Japanese and US government attitudes towards the rise of China. So yes, clearly there has been an interest in empowering countries other than China, notably India, Southeast Asia, and working with like-minded players such as South Korea, Japan, Australia, United States, and to a lesser extent, New Zealand. But also by trying to walk the tightrope of ambiguity to keep a sort of more rules-based normative approach to its security engagement in the region, also in the interest of the aforementioned mercantile goals. And clearly major factors have actually impacted on these decisions. I would argue that there has been an alignment of planets with the advent of the so-called Geopolitical Commission in Brussels, the one led by Ursula von der Leyen and her chief of staff, Seibert, who is particularly interested in addressing the China challenge. And they both came from Germany's Ministry of Defense before joining the presidency of the European Commission. And this alignment has been favored by a less transactional, less unilateral, and more transatlantic approach that has been evident by the advent of the Biden administration. And so this alignment of planets have allowed for an embrace of the Indo-Pacific concept and for a European buy-in. In 2022, with Russia's illegal full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we have also witnessed clearly an interesting dynamic, a dynamic of reciprocity, one that has been effectively characterized by US unrelenting support to Ukraine's plight, militarily, diplomatically, through active coordinations at the G7 and minilateral level, also in the interest of sanctioning Russia and cornering Russia. And that has not been lost to European players in terms of a quintessential political logic of exchanging favors, because of course, China or the Indo-Pacific has still been, under the Biden administration, the foreign and security policy priority of the United States government. The logic of reciprocity has also entailed an alignment with other middle powers that are closely linked up to the United States, especially President Yoon's South Korea, Japan, Australia, and to a lesser extent, New Zealand. And so the support that Europe has received in cornering Russia following its full-scale invasion of Ukraine from these players has been reciprocated also by a more proactive and heightened security intervention by the European Union and its member states in this region. And so the so-called one theater logic that the Biden administration insisted upon was clearly evident also by this sort of like team game among US-led like-minded players. This has also been favored, and we can go into greater details, by the discourse of course, a strategic analogy, I would call it, if not a strategic narrative, and a false analogy, in my opinion, of Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow. But I'm happy to actually take criticism and questions on this. Next slide, please. So this is a broad overview of my argument, the one you just heard. And I really do argue that this sort of one theater logic has been favored by and grown in full bloom under the Biden administration, and in this specific time and spatial context of the years of the Biden administration years, and especially following Russia's intervention, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But we have to take a step backwards. The very the very word Indo-Pacific, which is a rhetorical construct. It's a strategic narratives, not unlike the very idea of an Asia-Pacific, which was a construct dating back to the economic logic of globalization and of economic integration among Asia-Pacific countries. That logic was superseded in the 2000s by the term Indo-Pacific, and it's a distinctively geopolitical logic, one that effectively is code for pivoting away from Chinese power and the empowerment of countries other than China, starting with India, Japan, Southeast Asian countries, and like-minded countries effectively pivoting away from Chinese power. Now, that lingo was coined in Japan, and it was through Japan's successful moral suasion campaigns, what a former ambassador called in a closed-door workshop, a former Japanese ambassador called in a closed-door workshop, Japan's legal influence operations, the ability by Japan to sell the Indo-Pacific construct to the policy planning staff of the United States Department of State in 2017 has effectively gained worldwide currency. And so we need to speak of this growing interest in the stability of the region, of the Indo-Pacific region, as a byproduct, really, of the first Trump administration years, right? And it is precisely when the first Trump administration publishes the new national security strategy and the new national defense strategy that the American ship of state is steered into this new policy direction of prioritizing the China challenge. And I understand the first Trump administration as effectively then impacting on the policy priorities of first and foremost its Five Eyes allies, minus perhaps New Zealand back in the day, and secondly, European players. It is in 2019 that at the G7 level, the China stream is institutionalized. And clearly there is an active interest by major G7 players such as France also, because it was during France's presidency that the China stream has been inaugurated. But still there was a lot of caginess and I would say suspicions about the US approach towards China and the region in the eyes of many European players. But fast forward then to the Biden years, and through the also active efforts of France, Germany, the Netherlands, and the appropriation of a strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific by the European Union under the von der Leyen Commission. Now you have landlocked Czechia that has an Indo-Pacific strategy, or Lithuania that has an Indo-Pacific strategy. This is, yes, a byproduct of China's assertiveness, of China's warrior diplomacy during the COVID years, of China's self-serving behavior also by sitting in the fences initially and then by somewhat supporting Russia during its illegal war of aggression in Ukraine. As a byproduct of that, you do have this buy-ins by Czechia and Lithuania and other countries, but it's also, and this is something I'd like to stress, a byproduct of responding to US demand signals. Yes? So it's a distinctively political logic. But what is fascinating here is that this alignment masks the nuances of the nature of our engagement into the region. The very concept of Indo-Pacific has very many different definitions depending on space and time contexts and the government that actually defines the concept of Indo-Pacific. And so if for the Abe administration, a free and open Indo-Pacific has been synonymous with a pushback of Chinese power, perhaps under the first Trump administration, the concept has gained much more containment-tinted definitions, especially since 2019 and 2020. With regards to European players' definitions of the Indo-Pacific, I would tend to stress that the mercantile logic, the economic logic, and the normative one prevails over the security components that are more distinctively at play in the US, Japan, and to some extent also perhaps sometimes in Australia. But again, it also depends on the government that we're talking about, right? There is a very big difference between the Morrison government in Australia and the Albanese government today. And so to that extent, I actually define the Indo-Pacific a Rorschach test, a test that actually speaks wonders of the priorities of the government that appropriates its lingo. And the Chinese government actually appreciates that logic. When in early February of 2022, the Chinese and Russian governments published this joint statement of an unlimited friendship, there is a direct jab at the Indo-Pacific, but it's specific to the US definition of the Indo-Pacific. And that is not by mistake. That is precisely because there is an appreciation that there are very many Indo-Pacifics. Okay, even if the Chinese government prefers to call the region Asia-Pacific, I still prefer to call it Asia-Pacific just because I'm not a South Asia expert, by the way. Next slide, please. But this is important to keep in mind. So we talk the same language, but we mean different things. I can now then go into the greater detail of how is it that the Japanese government China grand strategy has acted as a transmission belt for other G7 plus players, and the EU is an actual member of the G7. So I would focus on the EU also because I have published articles about it, but also major European Union member states. And I would like to emphasize now the socialization of policy practice to from Japan here, which is an underappreciated argument. First and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, the very concept of Indo-Pacific comes from Japan. Granted, there has been some help and advocacy, parallel advocacy activities played out by Australia and to some extent India, but I do see Japan and Abe Shinzo's Japan as the leading impresario. I think that Japan has been particularly important also in endowing a specific approach to dealing with China, and that is how to actually embrace economic statecraft, specifically in the connectivity domains. And here, by connectivity, I mean the infrastructure projects, hard, soft infrastructure, capacity building, that have made it possible for what we used to call the Global South, which is effectively a misnomer for emerging and developing economies, to endow them with government financing and capacity to provide alternatives to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And this has, at the very core, under the Abe administration, an interest in denying China a sphere of influence, first and foremost in Southeast Asia, but also in what has traditionally been the sphere of influence of Australia and New Zealand, or what has traditionally been the sphere of influence of India. And so Japan has actually branched out to work with like-minded partners to provide government financing that would empower developing and emerging economies in the interest of making sure that China wouldn't get too much leverage over these countries. Political leverage, first and foremost, but also potentially economic leverage. And the Japanese and the very East Asian political economy has actually functioned along the developmental state model that is a distinctively mercantile model of actually helping out national champions gain market access in foreign countries. And so to all effects, this is the best policy. It's one that kills multiple birds with one stone. There is evidence of a socialization to Japan's developmental practices here in the United States with the remodeling of the old OPIC, America's policy bank, into a development finance corporation. And also evidence of socialization to Japan's best practices with the inauguration of the Blue Dot Network. This would actually take a life of its own under the Biden administration with the inauguration of similar plans such as Build Back Better World, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure. Again, some of this did not amount to concrete policy coordination because it's incredibly hard to get donor countries to agree along with recipient countries. But this, again, is policy practice that comes from Japan and successfully has been transmitted through the US-Japan alliance to other relevant actors. Another important aspect that I have seen playing out has been the one I've mentioned at the beginning of my talk, that is the full bloom of NATO's engagement with the region, starting with the first Trump administration, and more evidently so under the 2022 new strategic concept that has been distinctively critical of China's role in European security. And here I do see this coordination through the so-called NATO IP4 framework of coordination with South Korea, Japan, Australia, and to a lesser extent, New Zealand. This again is a byproduct of the desires of the Abe administration to enlist more players in pushing back against Chinese power, and do so perhaps through a process of socialization. Intelligence sharing also helps us to be socialized to the China challenge, us Europeans, and also through intelligence sharing that might help out other countries, defense industrial cooperation, interoperability, combating disinformation, and of course cyber defense. And this is a game that the Japanese government has been playing proactively so, along with the Biden administration in the past few years. The embrace and the strategic embrace of Taiwan has also been pushed by the Japanese government along with the US government, with evidence, if imperfect one, because much of our engagement with Taiwan happens under the carpet, as it should be, by also keeping the symbolism of our respective One China policies intact. But there is circumstantial evidence that Europe has stepped up its game on Taiwan, also as a byproduct of the demand signals that I mentioned before. Now, I will skip on some of the aspects that I highlighted. I have highlighted on this in this slide, but it's suffice to say that Europeans' growing presence has been evident by the dispatch of military assets from the likes of the UK, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, European players that you wouldn't expect to be around, also thanks to the good offices, again, of Japan. Because having reciprocal access agreements and the ability to have acquisition and cross-servicing agreements allows this kind of seamless ability to signal presence in our respective theaters and the interest in peace and stability in the Pacific and through the logic of reciprocity also in Europe. And next slide, please. Now, I'm aware that I'm short on time, and you have probably a lot of comments and questions and criticism, and please be as straightforward as you'd like. I reiterate my earlier point in this slide. I would just emphasize that I would be very careful in calling this presence as a way to enhance deterrence, because they actually amount to political signals, and to political signals that are important, yes, but they are gestures. I wouldn't expect Germany sending its Baden-Württemberg or Italy sending a multi-purpose patrol vessel, or, God forbid, our aircraft carrier, as we did in the event of a Taiwan contingency scenario. I'm not expecting that. It's very cheap, as the political science literature puts it, in terms of cheap signaling. It's very cheap to send, politically cheap, to send a naval asset to the region at times of peace. It's a whole different thing at the time of an actual contingency, of a kinetic contingency. But again, this shows commitment by presence. It does so by performing FINO of navigation operations, by sailing through international waters in the South China Sea, and also by crossing the Taiwan Strait, which should be considered international waters. And it shows commitment by presence also by witnessing firsthand Chinese behavior in the region, such as Chinese ships tailing European assets and whatnot, and of course the military buildup in the region. So there is a process and an element of relationality and socialization that is, I think, important. Yes, next slide, please. And this is my penultimate slide, and I'm very sorry for being the over-loquacious Italian. But again, I would emphasize that Europe too has bought in the very logic of connectivity and strategic infrastructure engagement. Perhaps less successfully than Australia, the United States, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, India, which have actually played a very seamless role with Japan in denying China's sphere of influence and providing alternatives to China's government financing in the region. But it's also concomitantly true, it's very true, that Europe has launched its own global gateway project, signature infrastructure project, and has actually signed a strategic connectivity partnership with Japan in 2019 for the purpose of aligning with Japan's own practice. I would nonetheless emphasize here, as I have done in my research, that along with the military presence that Europe has shown in the region, our embrace of the connectivity games have actually had very neat and very straightforward mercantile goals as a key driver. Italy sends assets to the region and will keep sending assets to the region because the region is booming in terms of its procurement market. France notoriously, through the enhancing security cooperation in and with Asia foreign policy initiative of the European Commission, has active stakes also in the rich procurement market. First and foremost, as evident, the Indian one. And Russia's war in Ukraine, and I'll be very short, it's just to give you my take, has been perhaps an accelerator of this dynamic because Russia can service and provide weapon systems to the likes of India and Southeast Asian players. And so there you go. France can actually step up the game. Italy can step up the game, or Germany can, by occupying a vacuum and perhaps taking advantage also of our third way approach to the region, which is distinct from a more containment-prone approach, such as the one that the United States has had or Japan has had. Because military procurement deals have at the backdrop also political considerations, because you want to make sure that spare components, servicing and repairing keeps coming. And so presenting ourselves as somewhat of a moderating and constructive force in the Pacific also ticks that mercantile goal. And I think I have another slide that actually is the concluding slide. That is the one that tackles the question I had in the abstract, and that is perhaps in the back of many of you. What will happen now that clearly that transatlantic bridge is burning, or rather risk actually being occupied at portions? Now that transatlantic mistrust runs deep, what is going to happen? The funny thing is that the arranged marriage, to some extent, what the Japanese would call an omiai, between European players and like-minded countries in the Pacific, the arranged marriage also thanks to the good offices of the United States under the Biden and the earlier Trump administration, will keep on going. This has been evidenced by the agreements I highlighted at the beginning, signed by Germany and Japan and Australia. And this is highlighted by the very logic I insisted upon in the concluding remarks of my presentation. The procurement market logic that feeds security engagement, the fact that now you have the chance to also engage into defense industrial cooperation with countries that are unshackling from their post-war limitations, notably Japan, which is a potential big player in emerging and disruptive technologies. And the Global Combat Air Program between the UK, Japan, and Italy is a noteworthy example of joint defense industrial cooperation across Eurasia, from Europe all the way to the Pacific. And the initiatives that both NATO and the EU have set up are going to facilitate this Euro-Pacific nexus that has been built as a byproduct of the logic and the history that I have, the preliminary history that I have recounted in my presentation. And thank you very much for your attention and patience. I hope it was clear. And I think that is effectively the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Roses, for coming to Hawaii and give us some historical view of what's happening right now globally with geopolitics. My name is Russell Homa. I'm the author of the book called The Blueprint, and that talks about the European Union and APEC organization working together on the so-called One Belt, One Road in that initiative, the BRI. But anyways, my question is to that. I know that you said that European Union, including Italy, is making that transition to come to Asia, will make that transatlantic, or more basically come into the Indo-Pacific region. But historically, the Europeans been here long ago. You know what's happened. The Indian was always here with the trading company, with the silk trade with China. The French was here with the French Indochina, with Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. The Germans were here with going down the South Pacific, Samoa, and down the stretch. So even Netherlands with the Dutch was here too. So historically, the Europeans was here long before, and Captain Cook found Hawaii. So we do have a good relationship with the Europeans here in Hawaii. But my question is here, like you mentioned NATO and wants to be, but as you know, Japan is trying to establish a liaison office in Tokyo, which they can work with the Indo-Pacific Rim Pact exercise and strengthen the relationship. And that's going to be something to look after. You know, even with the situation with the Iran war, with Strait Hormuz, with our shortage of the oil tankers being bombed over there. I know that President Donald Trump made a statement to NATO saying that with Article 5, one for all kind of concept, why sent the G7 countries and NATO country helping the U.S. to help bringing the security for the Strait Hormuz. Since most of the oil is going to be going to their country, even China too. And Japan has 90% oil coming from there, so they're kind of hesitant. They just had that meeting with Prime Minister Sonai Takeuchi and President Donald Trump, which was a very successful summit meeting. But now Trump is going to meet Xi Jinping of China in China end of this month, May 30th to June 3rd. So that'll be interesting what directions going to happen. And hopefully they can alleviate some of the tariff issue and some of the other concerns that we have. But my concern is that in Hawaii, we have this panda bear politics. And I know that East-West Center, President Richard Nixon made Dao Xiaoping and or Mao Tse-tung, and East-West Center was a key place. And we built East-West Center for that meeting. So historically, we have a very history with U.S.-China. Hopefully, maybe Xi Jinping can come here and maybe we can get panda bears for the Honolulu Zoo and send that in that way. But I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
And my book addresses a lot of concern with the European Union and APEC. When we want to make East-West Center as a free trade area, meeting APEC's policy of having a free traded area for all APEC countries to initiate a free trade agreement. And we want to make APEC Center in Hawaii as a free trade area so we can promote the free trade agreement. And it's going to happen eventually because the European Union and APEC is already moving that direction. And China signed an agreement with African nations to have a free trade already. So they're moving that direction. Thank you.
Thank you for those. You care to answer anything or?
Thank you.
shed any
No,
light?
just
Okay.
take them.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Let me move to, we have another question.
I'll read your book with great interest. Thank you.
Got your signed autograph.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me move. We have another question from our online audience. William Annenson is asking, are there lessons from Japan's strategic narrative?
I think the guys online can't hear you.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, his laptop is
Yeah,
connected.
that's what I'm using. So I think it should be okay.
Sorry.
But let me go ahead and I'll continue it. Are there lessons from Japan's strategic narrative and economic security policies that smaller or geographically remote economies, such as island states, could realistically adopt or adapt? So again, what lessons from Japan's, some of what you've described there?
Strategic narrative
And economic security policies.
Economic security.
Yeah, broadly.
Thank you. Thank you for this question. I think that the universal currency that the Indo-Pacific narrative, free and open or otherwise, has gained is actually a byproduct of its very universality, right? The fact that it is in many ways sufficiently malleable and flexible to definitions, as I have highlighted in my presentation, but it is at the same time premised very often on the pillars of a rules-based order, of freedom of navigation, of the global commons. And I emphasize these aspects specific to maritime security because these are the ones that small states, especially small island states, but also middle powers, have active stakes on, right? It is precisely the small and medium powers that have stakes in an order that is predictable, that is open, that is somewhat preserved by a consistency of international norms, rather than, of course, unpredictability, might makes right, predatory behavior, and the interference by hegemonic players. And I think that, of course, I'm not actually hinting at anything in particular here. I'm just hinting at the potential problems that come from great power politics. And that is actually precisely what Japan has been able to gain. The buy-in eventually destined to become great powers, such as G20 countries from the global south, Brazil, India, Indonesia. And so I think that this emphasis is what has made the free and open Indo-Pacific narrative, especially the one that the later Japanese government would push for and the European players would push for, gain wider currency, and that small states can buy into. And with specific, with regards to economic security and economic statecraft, I think that provision of global commons and provision of global public goods in the form of official development assistance, in the form of government finance or capacity building, so soft skills endowment, that is something that can also help out small states, especially if they work together with donor countries, perhaps, by leveraging scale also to negotiate better terms vis-à-vis donor countries. Yeah.
Trump Morrison, the East Center. And I thought you did a good job of explaining how Japan used the Indo-Pacific Transit as a way of kind of evoking broader alliance that was focused on tagging and perhaps also socialization into rules basis of China. But I wonder in the second Trump administration whether we see that a lot of countries now adjusting policy to a different international situation. And so the alignment may be not just against China, but also against the United States.
Right. This is the famous Thanks for your question. This question actually is a very hot question since the famous Davos speech that the Prime Minister of Canada has made about a entente of middle powers that have the ability to somewhat withstand the predatory behavior of rule-breaking great powers. He was Carney, for domestic political reasons as well, was and the US-Canada reasons in particular, was specifically hinting at US behavior. But it's clear also from his visit to China that there is still an engagement at arm's length of China. And much of the engagement that I see of China nowadays is not just as a byproduct of the United States behavior vis-à-vis allies, but also as a byproduct of a US-China stabilization. So we don't want to miss that bus as well. But to tackle your question more fully, is an entente of middle powers, of US-allied middle powers, let's be specific here, possible? I don't think so. I don't think so for a variety of reasons. We depend on US structural power big time. This is true of NATO countries, and it's true of US-Asia allies. We depend on the United States for market access. That's why we have actually accepted with meekness the trade deals, quote unquote, that also envision massive investment in the US economy following the Liberation Day tariffs, reciprocal, quote unquote, tariffs. We depend on the United States for energy imports. And this will probably be even more true now with the war in Iran. We depend on the United States, as we all know, for security. This is true of Ukraine, and this is true of Japan facing China. It's true of South Korea facing North Korea, and to a lesser extent, China. It's true of many other countries. And of course, security dependencies are evident in the intelligence domain, command and control, logistics, defense equipment and defense platforms. We actually think that Europe is militarizing now and that it will grow eventually autonomous. What we do not realize is that procuring defense systems in a rush right now, we're actually going to acquire mostly American defense platforms or defense systems that rely very much on US technological components. And if you have important US components, you have to also have a degree of political compliance vis-à-vis the United States. Even the next generation fighter jet project of the UK, Japan, and Italy does depend on the United States blessing, because the Biden administration has blessed that project, and we still hope that the sixth generation fighter jet will fly, thanks to the blessing of the ongoing and continuing blessing of the US government. And unfortunately, you might think that Europe can actually then coalesce at scale and unite, but there are competitive dynamics that make this very hard, because security threat perceptions are very different depending on the country and depending on the definition of what is your security priority. And even in the defense industrial collaboration aspect, clearly there are competitive elements that have been at play, as has been made clear by the inability for France and Germany to work out on the FCAS sixth generation fighter jet project. So again, this is to say, we depend on the United States very much. And hence that entails a degree of political compliance, an ongoing political compliance, even under Trump.
Let me take this question from online. It's coming in from Christina Moon. I want to thank you for this lecture. It's provided context for the initiatives that we've seen here, bringing Japanese defense tech and mixed-use startups to Hawaii. alongside other tech partnerships and investments here. The question is, what do you make of JERA's aggressive attempts to provide liquefied natural gas to Hawaii as a bridge fuel? In many ways, it's an illogical solution because we're supposed to be eliminating use of fossil fuels by 2045. And yet GRA is coming in hot, offering to finance $2 billion in required infrastructure, and Governor Green's administration is almost irrationally enthusiastic about it. I'm reading it as something that seems off. Is there something going on that I've been missing, but that you might have insight into taking this wider view? So that's
I am indeed from Rome and I like to pontificate, but coming from Rome, I like to wear my big white hat. Sorry, I'm not going to be blasphemous here, but no, I'm not an expert on energy security and energy policies, and so I've taken note of the question and I actually will look into it. I'm very curious, but I'm unable to answer it.
So, there's the biggest news in Taiwan that yesterday our government put one of the chairman of the party to jail, and the judgment system that control our governments that say that he will be there 17 years because he steals the money from governments which they cannot find any cash flow. But that's not my question. And here's the debate that China's and there's always a debate that is anytime like Chinese government ever invades to Taiwan, the US government is willing to help or not. And I'm not asking that yes or no, but I want to ask that is there any factors that affect the US government's willingness to either help or not help Taiwanese? For example, if Taiwanese government chooses to become like a or like dictatorship, especially worried about that our president right now, if he lost the election, he might not be giving up his power. There's so much benefit from it. So or other like or like don't willing to buy more weapons from the US that everything can affect the US government's attitude about education.
Right. We have to be on time, right? So I'll have to be okay. Sure. Okay. Thank you for your question. And indeed, the arrest of Ko Wen-je and the nature of Taiwanese politics is a good window on the other types of contestation that we're living nowadays, the ones that are closer to home, right? That there is this double whammy of international contestation that goes hand in hand with political polarization within societies, including the Taiwanese one. And I think that to answer your question on what would actually influence and make the United States government keep the peace and deterrence across the Taiwan Strait, I would say that this question has to be unpacked in terms of the gains, the transactional gains, which this administration, US administration, is particularly interested in. And there is evidence that one major gain that is not often spoken about is the status gain. Trump is very cognizant, and the Trump administration is very cognizant of its own image. I think many of the actions of this government are actually premised on communication more than anything else, image and the way of portraying itself as being in command and in control is very important and dear to this administration, to the point that the president himself has made it clear, the US president has made it clear that Xi Jinping would not invade Taiwan during his mandate. So I think this is important to keep in mind, because if push comes to shove, there is then the danger of losing face and of actually reacting to a potential contingency across the strait. And this is important at the personal level to the specific president or any US president under their mandate, in the near future at least. But it's also true to the very image of the United States as a hegemonic player in world politics. If Taiwan were to fall, this would be a massive blow to the very status of the United States as a reliable ally vis-à-vis Japan, vis-à-vis South Korea, vis-à-vis NATO countries. Of course, Europe is less important, and this is clearly not as important as it used to be. This sort of like reputation as a credible ally. But it's still important in the context of US hegemony. And it's still important in the context of the power politics unfolding in the region. I think US-China competition is here to stay, and losing Taiwan would be a massive blow to the United States. Now, this being said, Trump is unpredictable. Trump might cut a deal of sorts, not a grand bargain, but a deal such as a new communique with new language between the US and China on Taiwan. But it will not be at the expenses of Taiwan to the point that it throws Taiwan under the bus. I don't think so. I also think, however, thank you. I also think, however, that China is capitalizing on the divisions within Taiwan and the potential for this president, US president, to somewhat stabilize the bilateral relationship and present new language on Taiwan, and perhaps sell less weapons that are going to go to Iran, and do a favor to Xi Jinping, as a massive blow to US credibility. I wouldn't bank on that, because the system in the United States, starting from actors here in Hawaii, all the way to the Congress, would push back. And I think this is important to keep in mind. Then we can talk all we want about Taiwan's silicon shield of TSMC, of the economic security, which would be a factor. But first, I don't foresee any Chinese actions in the near term. Chinese civil military relations are in disarray. Chinese economy is facing headwinds, and Xi Jinping, with a very small central military commission, is a risk-averse political player. So I think that we will still have somewhat stable cross-strait relations in the near future.
Thank you so very much. And actually, with that, we're going to bring closure to our gathering today. Really delighted to have these remarks. I want to remind you that in case you didn't get enough today, he has another talk tomorrow that's going to be here, sponsored by the Center for Japanese Studies. They have a seminar series, and we'll be talking tomorrow about Japan's security and grace of Taiwan. So perhaps an opportunity to continue that. Also, just acknowledge that we're delighted to be co-sponsoring this with the Asian Studies Department at UH Manoa, and as an incoming colleague, really grateful that you could join us today. Let me remind you as well that we will have a YouTube file that we'll share it in the case of wish to share with others. Also grateful for those who joined us online. Thank you for your visit, and on that, stay tuned for again additional details on upcoming East West Center events. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And just a reminder, we do have across the hall
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, why?
Oh.
No mishap.
Technical.
No. I think that was